Good morning. Welcome to our teaching on O Taste and See. Today we're going to be reading in Psalm 34. And at the time that this was written, it was David who had written this. He was inspired by God to write it. And here in Psalm 34, as we read, I want to give you the backstory of what has happened before this is written. It's really interesting. It's a part of David's life that we don't often teach and study because there's really these really two kind of popular main stories. One is that he was anointed to be king. He slayed the giant Goliath. And two, that once he was king, he had this sin that he fell into of adultery and also murder. And so those are two pretty common stories that are taught about David. But we're going to look at the backstory of the context of which was written here in Psalm 34. When David writes this, we need to know what has been going on in his life to really take all of this into perspective. So what has happened is that David at this time, and when this was written, that he was married. He had two wives, and he had children, and he had so much favor of the people. He was not yet king, but he had so much favor of the people, and it has spawned this negative energy and envy of Saul. So much so that Saul desires to kill him. And so David, though, has been given the promise by God that he would one day become king of Israel. Well, what does David do whenever he sees that, Saul is out to get him? David was just, let's just kind of take a minute and see why this envy really happened. It's because David was very favored of the people because for a lot of reasons, but because he was great on the battlefield is what it really ends up being. A lot of different things. He was a great people person. He was a great leader. He was handsome. The Bible teaches us that he was handsome, and that he was out on the battlefield, though. He was slaying tens of thousands of people. He was very, very good. Why is that? Because God had anointed him, and God had his favor on him. And so because David is able to go out and do all of this and be such a grand leader and a protector for the people of Israel, the people start to really look to David as king and as their leader, and they desire to have him as such, and they have a lot of favor on him. But Saul is like, he's still alive, he's like, no way is he going to come in and he's going to take over my kingdom. And so there's this strife that occurs and this contention between David and Saul. So David just takes off. He takes his wives, he takes his children, and he takes a company of 600 men of his close people, and he runs off to where? To enemy lines, to enemy land. He runs off to the Philistines, which at the time, the Philistines probably exceeded, the sin and wickedness of any other group of people at the time, probably. And the Philistines are, remember, the ones who David had slain their giant, Goliath, many years before when he was a boy. And so David runs off with all these people to the Philistines. Now, think about that vulnerability and how desperate he must have been to run off to this kind of an area, to the enemy. But he ends up being accepted by their leader. You can read about this in Samuel. I believe it's 1 Samuel. And so he ends up being accepted and kind of favored by this leader, and the leader ends up giving David some of the land so that he can, set up for his people and his company and whatever, and his wives and children and all these people. And so David is there, not in his own land, not under the safety and protection of his own people. He's there with a small group. And he starts to settle in. He ends up being there for about 16 months. He starts to settle in there in the land of Philistines, and Gath is where it's at. And so he ends up taking off periodically on these raids, and he would go out and he would slay the enemies of Israel. And when he'd go out to slay these groups of people and these enemies of Israel, he would come back with all this loot. And so obviously it drew attention of the Philistines. And so he told them that he was out slaying Israel and the people of Judah and the people around and near Judah. So he lies. And so they think that there's even more of this divide between David now and his own people. So they're starting to build some confidence in David. And they're accepting of what he's doing. Why? Because they're slaying the enemy. He's slaying some of their enemy for them. Remember, they were enemies. And so throughout this course of him lying and running off and doing these raids, coming back with all this loot, they end up wanting David to go to battle with them. But against who? Israel. Now, I want to tell you that as David was slaying the enemies of Israel, he wasn't off slaying who he said he was. As he was off slaying the enemies of Israel, he would not leave anyone alive. He would make sure to slay every person so that they could not tell who it was that came and killed them all. Because he didn't want people to find out who he was really slaying was the enemies of Israel and not Israel, the Israelites themselves, not his own people. And so he's having to lie, and he's having to make sure that every person, as they go to these raids, he has to make sure they're all dead. So he's trying to cover up for himself constantly. So he's having to live kind of in fear, really. Think about that. So he was already dealing with Saul. He devises his own plan and leaves his own people and puts all of his family and his closest people, his company of men, and he puts them in a place that was even more vulnerable, right? Because all of these people don't have this favor that the Israelites had for David. So now he's in a worse condition. And isn't that what happens? That every time we don't believe the Word of God and the promises of God, that we end up in doubt. We devise our own plan and make our own way, and we make it far worse than the original situation, which David had an opportunity to see God protect him at that time, but he didn't believe. He fell into doubt. So he takes off. So then what ends up happening is this group of Philistines say, well, come on to battle with us. We're going against the Israelites. Wow, then he's going to be found out. And he has to go with them. And what ends up happening is the chief leaders of the Philistines say, take David and his company of men off the battlefield. They don't want him there. They end up removing him. But David ends up knowing he's going to be found out, and he flees. Where does he go? Into a cave. And that's what we're seeing here in Psalm 34. So David has fled to this cave. He is absolutely desolate now. He's completely alone. He doesn't even have his family. And he's hiding out and fearing his life every day. He's back in the area of the Israelites, okay? He's back in Judah, but he's living in a cave. He's back in Israel. He's living in a cave. And he's fearing his life every single day because now everybody's out to get him. Now he's at a catch-22. He can't go anywhere. He has enemies everywhere. He's fearing his life. He's afraid. But what ends up happening, we're going to see here in Psalm 34. It says, I will bless the Lord. This is David, remember. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make her boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear thereof and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me. O let us exalt his name together. What are we seeing here? We're seeing David bless and exalt the name of the Lord, to praise God. Why? Because daily David he's coming to himself. He's realizing that his plan didn't work. He's realizing that God promised me anyway I was going to be king, and I'm not king yet. And God knew all this was going to happen. And so he's having this, and he's seeing the protection of God on him. He's seeing how God took care of it, how God was patient with him, and how even when he was run off to the Philistines, that God still was protecting him. Still had his hand on him. Verse 4 says, I sought the Lord, and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears. What does David do? He seeks the Lord. He repents. He says, Lord, I need to see you in this situation. I need to know what you want me to do. That's what seeking the Lord is, right? When we've made our own way, it always turns out to be worse than what it was, right? We make a situation way worse. But seeking the Lord about our scenarios and saying, God, how can you? What would you do if you were me? Show me the way out. And so David says, I sought the Lord, and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears. What were David's fears? His life, his family's life. And he says God delivered him of all of his fears. And what is deliverance? It's whenever something is brought to us or handed over to us. It is when something is provided that was expected or promised, right? So David is seeing this deliverance, that God is coming through on his promise, even though David has failed him yet again and went his own way. Verse 5, it says, they looked unto him and were lightened, and their faces were not ashamed. The poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. David speaking of himself. He says, I don't even have to be ashamed. The Lord is so good to me. I've cried unto him. I've repented. I've sought a way out, and he is going to make a way. He's going to provide a way. Verse 7, it says, the angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth them. You know what David's saying there? You know what this encampeth, it says the angel of the Lord encampeth round about. He's speaking about an encampment. An encampment was a resting place for like the military people, you know, the armies, the companies of people. They would encamp, and they would settle in these areas. And he's saying this is what the angel of the Lord, it's like a military protection. It's like a safety that's there. And when I sleep at night, I know that he is with me. He has provided protection for me. And as I go about my day and I'm seeking out food and water, and I'm having to leave my cave where I've been hiding, I know the angel of the Lord is there with me. Why? Because he is recognizing that those promises that God made, he intends and will continue to come through on. And David is standing in a place of trust and faith. He is putting his confidence where it needs to be. Verse 8, this is our closing text. It says, O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him. What do we see David saying? He says, hey, you know what? Every aspect of God that you try is always good. He says, just see it for yourself. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him. Putting your confidence in God, he will never fail you. Putting your faith in him, he will never, ever let you down. And that every aspect of God that you will lean into, you will find to be a wonderful, wonderful thing. Have you ever tried, when David says, oh, taste and see, you know, if in order for us to get the full effect of food, it's not just smelling it, it's not just seeing it, right? Have you ever seen a plate that just was laid out perfectly and you're hungry, you're desiring to eat something, and then this looks so good, but that doesn't give us the full effect. We have to try it, right? We have to taste it. And so David is using this analogy to say, you know what? God is there for you. And all these wonderful things are there for you to lean into and to try and to see. And you will never be let down. You will always be so glad that you gave God an opportunity to bless you and to be an influence on you. David says, just try it. You will see. You ever tried a new food? Somebody shared that may be one of their favorite meals or favorite snacks, or you went to a new restaurant. I know one of the things I do when I go to somewhere new is I will, like a new restaurant or something, I will ask them what are their popular dishes that they sell. What is their items that everybody. One of the things I'll say is, what do people come here for? Like, what is it that you all are known for, or what is it that everybody loves and that you hear, you know, good feedback on? And so they'll tell me. Usually it's, you know, one or two things, but sometimes they'll share several things. And so I have these options, you know, but I know that they're going to be good. It's what everybody's coming for. And I never get a bad meal that way. And you know what? That's why it's important for us to testify about the goodnesses of God to others. But not only that, in order to get the full effect of a meal, of food, it's not just laid out before us. We have to try it, to taste it, and make it ours, right? And you know what? Every single day, every day, we have this opportunity to learn something more about God and to lean in to him just a little bit more. And it's always good. I've also tried things in my life that did not taste good, right? Have you ever done that? I went to a restaurant one time and I could have swore that they opened up a can of dog food. I mean, to tell you, I could not eat it. Like, I took one bite, and that normally doesn't happen for me because I'm a big foodie. I love food. But, oh my goodness, it's, you know, I wouldn't doubt that, you know, to come to find out that they were maybe serving cans of dog food. I'm telling you, it was terrible. And I'll never forget that. But, you know, I've tried things that weren't good, right? You know, when we devise our own way, and it turns out like dog food. I mean, it turns out terrible. It leaves a terrible taste in our mouth, and we don't seem to forget it. It's something that happens, and we know that we have made the wrong choice. We have made the wrong decision. But when we lean into God, expecting that he's going to come through on his promises, so many promises that are given to us in his word, countless, we can rest assured that we can learn something new about him every day, and it's always going to be good. Oh, taste and see. Just try it. Give him an opportunity. Give the Lord an opportunity to show himself and to reveal himself to you in ways that you have never known, right? or maybe ways that you do know the goodness of God, but you've rejected His truth. I love this passage here in Psalm 34. You can go on to read more of it today if you're looking for some more reading in the Word. You can go and finish out that chapter. It's not very long there in Psalm 34. Starting in verse 9, we read down through verse 8, and maybe read more. And now, knowing the backstory, I think that it will mean something even more to you as you read and study the Word. Well, God bless you all. Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow with a new teaching with the Amazing Grace Women's Retreat. We'd love to have you all. We meet in person at coffee shops in Southern Indiana, in Sellersburg, Indiana. If you'd like some more information about that, just send us a message. You can find us on Facebook at Amazing Grace Women's Retreat. God bless you all. Subscribe to our page if you'd like to get updates on our new teachings.